All right, I have a new Substack essay out entitled "You Are Part of an Experiment," and the subtitle is "Or Human Life Under the State of Exception." Before talking about the essay a little bit, I want to say that subscriptions are $5 a month, so it's pretty cheap. I've been putting out a lot of essays commenting on current topics, and I also do private astrology readings. They're not free. So there's that, and I always appreciate Patreon subscriptions. It helps fund all of my YouTube videos. We've just finished going through Faust, which exists now in 21 videos, complete, scene by scene, Faust parts 1 and part 2. So I did the whole thing. So now the topic of this essay, now what it does is it examines the metaphysics of the current social situation. It touches on some of the topics that I've touched on in earlier Substack essays, such as the Wuhan virus, such as the incompetent Biden administration. Several of these topics I circled back on, but this is a little different. The approach that I've taken in this essay is now metaphysical. It is no longer commenting on this or that particularity, but putting all of this together into a single metaphysical picture now. In which what is going on, and I'll give out a little bit of it here, has to do with the fact that you, that is to say all of us, especially in America, are taking part in a joint scientific political experiment in which we are the guinea pigs. This has never happened before, a global pandemic, so it's a total historical singularity. And I think that the ontological conditions of the human being have now been irrevocably altered, such to the point where I make the prediction that in the future, historians will put in a new designation as PC and AC, that is to say, pre-COVID, the pre-COVID era versus after COVID. And PC and AC, I think, will replace, and I'm not joking about this, will replace BC and AD, or the odious BCE and CE. With regard to BC and AD, the era before Christ, in which the ontological status of the individual was that you were a subject within the universal state of the Roman Empire. That was your status, and along with that came certain obligations, certain duties, but also certain privileges. Once the universal church after the Christ event had taken place, the metaphysical or ontological, and they're the same thing, the ontological status of the human individual changed from that of a Roman subject to that of an individual cell within the mystical body of Christ. So you were now participating in the mystical body of Christ, which was essentially coterminous with the universal church that came in to replace and displace the Roman universal state. And so I think that with PC and AC, we're going to see a different status ontologically before COVID and ontologically after it. The human being is not the same thing. And for this, I've invoked some philosophical ideas from two far left thinkers, Giorgio Agamben with his idea of Homo Sacer, his famous book that came out in the 90s, and Foucault. And on the one hand, and then the far left thinker, indeed a Nazi, political theorist, Carl Schmitt, whom Agamben presupposes. You cannot understand his book Homo Sacer, far left though it may be politically, without understanding Carl Schmitt, which Agamben uses, draws from, and presupposes, as well as Foucault. And so so we have to keep in mind that this is a very complex experiment that's going on. It's a joint scientific political experiment, since the left has politicized everything, as is revealed by Dr. Fauci, who's the key Dr. Frankenstein in this experiment, as is revealed by his alliance with the Biden administration. It is jointly scientific and political. Now, Foucault made the distinction between systems of visibility versus discursive formations about those systems of visibility. Systems of visibility have to do with things like hospitals, prisons, schools, whereas discursive formations or systems of articulability are statements about those physical institutions. For example, the discursive formation regarding the purpose, or what he also calls the diagram of prisons, is penalization. That of schools is education. That of hospitals is care. those are the discursive statements or the systems of articulability that are made about systems of visibility. Now, with regard to the situation with the Biden administration, we have on the one hand, lockdowns, and on the other, mandates. Lockdowns are now new systems of visibility. For example, the need to see the streets as empty. That may not be literally true at the moment, but it is most certainly psychologically true, as revealed by our ever worsening conditions of isolation and rising rates of mental illness and suicide attempts, and mandates, which are systems of articulability. In other words, thou shalt comply with the lockdowns, which need to result in visible changes. So this is part of the ontological metaphysical circumstances. And then so Foucault has this idea of a diagram in which both of these are connected together, these two systems, of that which you can say about a system or social formation and that which is visible within it. The diagram is simply the way in which, in a particular epoch, such as the sovereign society or the disciplinary society, or now today, the after-COVID society, in which there is, both are united with this diagram, and each of these social formations or social historical epochs has a different diagram. That is to say, a way of organizing what happens. And with regard to what is going on now with the Biden administration, what happens is that under the conditions of a plague, you have a complete regulation of life down to the smallest detail by a centralized political authority. And that also, of course, leads us then into Carl Schmitt's idea of a state of exception, which is bound up with this in his famous, I think it's 1922, Political Theology, which is a very short book, which opens by saying, he is sovereign who decides upon the state of exception. And the state of exception is a political situation that erupts in which the previous constitution is suspended, as was the case with the Weimar Republic, with the rampant inflation that was going on. And when the Nazis came into power, that constitution was suspended. Make no mistake about it, the Biden administration has, whether consciously or not, and they're generally not very bright people, has declared a state of exception and a suspension of the Constitution. They are violating your rights at every step with a vaccine mandate that will cause incalculable damage to our labor force, and with a violation of the First Amendment, freedom of speech, Merrick Garland signing a memo that gives power to the FBI to go and investigate parents at school board meetings as domestic terrorists. Totally ridiculous and a violation of the First Amendment, as is the sicking the IRS on people whose annual income is over $10,000, which is almost everyone's. Sicking them on it to do audits is a violation of the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. So it's clear that with the Biden administration, there's all kinds of suspensions and unconstitutional acts, such as the mandate, the vaccine mandate. The government has no constitutional right to tell you what you can put into your body, what you have to put into your body. That is unconstitutional. Sorry. So all of this amounts to the declaration of a state of exception. I could go on here because it leads down into Agamben and lots of details. I think this is the richest, longest essay that I've written on Substack so far. In a way, it's a synopsis and summa of all the previous essays that I've written on this topic. So I want you to subscribe, so I'm going to leave it there. $5 a month, the price of a Starbucks cup of coffee, a Trente cup of coffee. So I'll leave it there. See you on Substack. Take care.